he's the most, I think, it's the most influential figure in the economic geography and geography innovation literature, and also correlates fields. We also look in during the presentations, the names that are wrong is in a lot of presentations, so it's really influential figure in these topics. Due to this, his contribution in these topics, in 2024, Ron was awarded I try my best, Voltrin Lud Prize. This is considered a Nobel Prize of the geography. So I think this is award, in my opinion, and I believe in the opinion all the people know him, is really, really, truly well deserved, I believe. And and also it's important to know this award was conferred for one Brazilian geographer in 1994. So the name, the geographer is Milton Santos. I don't know if the people know. And today, Ro, you delivered the presentation intituled, I think it's different, the name, but...
Yeah, sorry about that.
Sorry, don't worry. The name is Towards the Evolutionary Perspective on Institution and Economic Geography. And Ron, thank you for accepting your invitation. So welcome to Plenary, and the floor is yours.
All right, thanks a lot. Let me just install myself here. A lot of wires. Yeah. All right. Yeah, thanks, Helena. Thanks for the kind introduction, and of course, thank you for being here and attend the lecture. I was thinking a lot about what I should present, and I decided to talk about theory and not to present any empirical study. So if you would expect an empirical study, I'm sorry I have to disappoint you, but because I think this is already a topic that I have on my mind for 5 or 6 years, but it's not always easy to find time to really work on it. It's about the role of institutions in regional development. Of course, it's an old topic that many scholars have contributed to. But I wanted to take a more dynamic perspective than is commonly applied in this literature, and would like to share some preliminary ideas which I would like to develop further. So I would like to share some ideas, and then I would very much welcome any feedback or any inputs you might have, because it's not always a very easy topic, but I feel still kind of encouraged to present it here. But this is definitely a work in progress. It's really about the role of institutions, and I've been dealing a lot with applying an evolutionary perspective in economic geography, and many times there were a critique that the role of institutions was kind of underdeveloped in that particular framework, well, they might even be right about that. So there is indeed room to improve and to see to what extent we can incorporate an evolutionary perspective on institutions that take a more systemic perspective, and which also is doing full justice to an evolutionary approach. So, of course, you're all familiar with literatures on the impact of institutions on economic development. We have a Nobel Prize winner not that long ago that actually Daron Acemoglu, but also Oliver North. That literature, I mean, it's big, it's huge, And they all tend to look at institutions and to what extent that might affect economic development. And that literature then comes up with all kinds of suggestions that some institutions might be good, some institutions might be bad, some good institutions might be property rights or social capital or a lack of corruption and on all of that. Well, bad institutions might be a lack of property rights, etc. So I'm not going to summarize that literature because then I would probably talk for another week. But this is just a big literature, as you all know. So that's all I'm going to say on that literature. But I want to move on, and because in almost all of those accounts, institutions are treated in isolation, right? So you just have a set of institutions and you just you regress them, and then you want to see which institutions might have impact on economic development. But institutions then are treated in isolation in the sense that institutions might only function effectively when combined with other institutions, right? So, and this is of course what we observe in practice. We cannot just isolate. Yeah, we can do it in regressions, but we cannot isolate the effect of institutions because institutions are there in reality with many other institutions, and those might affect their functioning. So, and this is of course not new. This is a literature that is already out there. I just outlined a number of names: Amable, Crouch, Streeck and Thelen. Jessup, I'm sure you're familiar with those names that actually try to develop this systemic perspective on institutions and to see to what extent we can actually make progress in assessing the impact of institutions on economic development. I want to go through a number of those literatures and just to see where their contributions were, but also take a very critical perspective to all of those three. So I think and this is the literature on institutional complementarities. First of all, I will say something on the varieties of capitalism literature. Again, I'm sure you're all familiar with that one. Holland Soski's book published in 2001 was one of the seminal books on that particular literature. You have the policy mix literature, and there's a big literature on social technical transitions which connects to sustainable transitions. So I will go through them. I'm gonna discuss them critically, and then I suggest to come up with an alternative. So indeed, I'm gonna review them. Then I will explore some fields of applications. Try to develop a new research agenda. Develop a method to analyze complementarities between institutions. And then, if time allows, I can say something on data sets that can actually be used because it puts high demand on quality of data sets, at least the ideas that I have in mind. Well, just a brief introduction on this variety of capitalism literature, right? So I always found this literature very interesting in the sense that I'm also I've not only a background in economics, but also a background in geography. And of course, despite globalizations, we still find a lot of different types of capitalism and how countries organize themselves, how they coordinate economic actions, etc. And this whole Soski's book was really about exploring the notion of institutional complementarities. So what they try to identify is a system of institutions that regulate and coordinate labor relationships, corporate governance relationships, product market relationships, and interfirm cooperative relations. And they all seem nothing to have in common, but the idea there was those domains are regulated by all kinds of institutions that might form a system in particular countries. And And the classic example, the classic distinction they made in their book is liberal market versus coordinated market economies. And a typical example for liberal market economies was the US, in which all those institutions, the set of institutions that are available in the US, and the way economic transactions are coordinated, they are super flexible, and assets can be deployed to alternative uses because the institutional system allows to do that. There's a flexible labor market, there's a flexible capital market, very responsive to new developments, which is a very different institutional system than the coordinated market economies. Often, at least in the past, Germany was taken as an example, in which the institutional system is more focused on specific and committed access to assets that cannot be put to alternative uses because they have more long-term orientation. This is just a slide. Sorry, I can't see the source, but I took it from somewhere and I didn't make it myself. But these are some key features that those two institutional systems characterize. For example, in terms of industrial relations, in liberal market economies, it's largely restricted on the wage profit game, while in coordinated market economies, there's more a room for strategic interactions between employers and employee organizations. They tend to negotiate, etc. In terms of corporate governments, there in the liberal market economy is very much a financial reliance on the stock market. There's more focus on short-term orientation. Well, according to this literature, in coordinated market economies, finance through banking is much more important, and they tend to take a more long-term orientation in the sense that they're more committed fully to company once an investment has been made. Well, I can go through all of those, but I'm sure you're familiar with this literature. All in all, it is saying, covering all those dimensions, this set of institutions are very different between those two types of systems and the way they are coordinated. Now, there has been some critique on this particular literature. One is for sure is that maybe there are more than two institutional systems, right? So, and indeed, I've seen many publications that try to characterize the Chinese variety of capitalism, and also in emerging economies. So we have to go beyond this dual characterization, but also it's very much focused on methodological nationalism, in the sense that that is all what happens at the institutional level as a national feature. But also, of course, being a geographer, there are also big differences among regions inside countries that might have a very different institutional tissue. Think about a country like Italy. The northern Italy is very different from the south of Italy in terms of the institutions that are available to economic actors in both types of regions. Most of the problems I have with this literature is that there's too much focus on functionalism, right? So you can say those are ideal types that they characterize. So, but it seems like the system is too perfect to be true, right? So the focus is on complementarities, and the whole system seems to fit and to work and to produce particular outcomes. Now the question is, can we actually observe that in reality? Also, a lot of that in the variety of capitalism is focused on institutional stability, right? So the system is there, and as we all know, it's very hard to change the system. because it is not, you can just try to change one component, but if it is very much directly related to other components, it's very hard to change. Which I think it's a nice perspective, but on the other hand, also institutions tend to change, and when taking an evolutionary perspective, we should incorporate the role of institutional change and to develop an understanding of that. And then I'm not so sure whether the varieties of capitalism can really provide some insights here. So we have to move on, meaning that we have to include as much countries and regions as possible. In principle, we have to cover the whole world and develop a theory on that. Institutional systems, as I said, are very much predefined. Focus on functionalism in the sense that a system works in one way. But how about what we find in practice? Can we not think about defining an institutional system that is being revealed through the data? So, and taking a data-driven perspective, and I will come back to that. We have to go and incorporate the notion of institutional change, because, as we know, in evolutionary thinking, it's very much focused on structural change, and structural change is only enabled through institutional change, because new economic structures require new institutions. So, but then the big question is, do those new institutions actually start from scratch, or are they not embedded in existing institutions? So if that would be the case, then we would have the opportunity to define a set of institutional options that is available in each region. But you cannot change in any direction given the set of institutions that you already have. Also, is it possible to make a meaningful taxonomy of all regions in terms of what they share in terms of institutional requirements? Right, so could be a big question. Is it possible to identify good and bad institutional combinations that region make? Well, when you take a functional approach, that's almost impossible by definition. So we have to go beyond that functional approach, and actually do regions that make different institutional combinations, does that really matter for their performance in terms of economic development, in terms of social inequality, in terms of environmental transition, etc., etc.? Worth to explore. Second literature that is really coming close to the idea of this institutional complementarities, and that is the policy mix literature. The policy mix literature is a very interesting literature that some of us are actually using it. I'm not sure whether, I think I heard it in one of the presentations, although it was not, no? Okay, you didn't come across it, but I think it's very important, right? So because if we think, when we talk about policy, and we say, okay, we should try to develop a policy change, is then anything goes? Is it just that we take it from an economic textbook and we just going to implement it? So we will raise more, we will grant more subsidies, or we will increase taxes. But does that not really depend on the other type of policies that have already been implemented in that particular context? So to what extent can actually a policy change become effective if not matched by other policy domains? And this is, of course, very much central in the thinking that we do, for example, in sustainability transition literature, in which we say, hey, you know, if we really want to tackle and fight climate change, it's not just that there is one particular policy measure that you have to take, but you have to intervene in many different policy dimensions, and you have to align them. You have to make them complementary. If not, you will never have an effective climate change policy, because you can create many windmills, but if you're not delivering on other parts of policy, environmental policy domains, it might not have a big difference. Actually, if you think about that, I find that a very interesting perspective. And it also means that past policies then can provide opportunities, but also constrain the range of policy options countries and regions might have. So there is no one size fits all. And we have to take that on board. So what can be done in terms of policy change in one context might be very different in another policy context. And we have to account for that. Interestingly, there are already some studies on that. I just have a few examples here. In innovation policy, the policy mix literature is becoming more established. Green policy, mission-oriented policy, mission-oriented policy. And so people seem to be aware, scholars seem to be aware and try to incorporate that in their empirical work. What all those studies have in common is an emphasis on case studies, right? So there is no study that actually is trying to do comparative work in the sense to which countries and regions make similar policy combinations, or to what extent might the same policy work in one context and not in another context. Could be a quite crucial question, but I don't see that many of these studies. So also here, although this policy mix literature has provided some insights, at the same time, those policy mixes are again very much predefined. So when you talk about a perfect environmental policy, you might think about all the policy domains that you have to change, and then you take a very functional approach in order to make it work. But what if we just look at combinations that countries or regions actually make in terms of policies? And is there something to be learned there? Is there some kind of logic? Is there some regular pattern that we can observe? So we don't predefine which are the perfect policy mix, but we let the data speak, and this policy mix will be revealed to us, and then we can actually see what happens in practice. And there might be a lot of insights to be derived from that. Is it possible then to define a set of policy options in each region? Right. So can we then just recommend that this policy will never work in that particular context? Well, in other contexts, it would work perfectly because it would really match the policy mix that is already there. To me, that is an exciting research question that we could develop further, but we need to do research on that. Is it possible to identify good and bad policy mixes that regions make? So if we really look what happens in practice and what policy interventions are actually taking place, can we really observe some good practices in the sense that some regions actually make the right choices in that respect, make them complementary? But I'm afraid that the practice is much more messy because, let's be honest, if we think about policy, we only take one domain into account and not others. So, and that has consequences on what we might observe in reality. Come back to this. Third literature on institutional complementarities. This is the literature on social technological transitions. Again, I think you're quite familiar with that. This is the regime versus Nice literature. I just, there are quite a lot of Dutch scholars that have contributed to that. Ari Rip and Kemp here I just gave a definition that I took from their 1998 publication. The regime is a Korean complex of scientific knowledge, engineering practices, production process technologies, product skills, procedures, established user needs, regulatory requirements, institutions, and infrastructure. So for them, taking a systemic approach is focusing on internal alignment of all those dimensions that are in that regime. And so they're gonna define those regimes in terms of, and predefine them in the sense to what extent all those domains in this definition are actually complementary to each other and reinforce each other's functioning. Institutional complementarities are only part of this alignment process because it goes much more beyond institutions. But the idea is the same. There are a few scholars which I admire a lot, Christian Beans and Leo Fumschilling and Bernard Hoover, that are actually doing work on this particular, and also take a multi-scalar perspective, right? So they look at the international, the national, and the regional dimension, and to what extent this alignment process also cross different geographical scales. And they do some very interesting work on that. This is about the regime issue, but the theory should also be about change in regimes. How is that possible when you have such a coherent framework in which everything is aligned to each other? How can you still try to introduce change? Well, the niche concept has been developed for that, right? Gels and Raven, some Dutch colleagues, have really done some seminal work on that. Often there's a lot of focus on agency and entrepreneurs, how agents change institutions in that respect. So to create their own niche inside an existing regime that is rather hostile to the development of this particular niche. So in a way, how they define it is that there is a duality between agency on the one hand and a structure on the other hand, and the structure is hostile. So if you construct a niche, you have to challenge the existing regime. Back to the other letter. Now, to me, I can see it provides some insights, but also I have problems with it in phrasing it like this. First of all, there's too much focus on the role of agency because it is often taken in an acontextual context, in the sense that the regime only works as a constraint, but might not provide any opportunities to enable this change to take place. So this niche can actually, why don't we exclude the possibility that a niche can actually could exploit features of a regime, right? So why we only look at that from a hostile point of view, and there's very much focus on radical departure, as if everything needs to be built from scratch. So we have to think and rethink, in that sense, how we can implement institutional change and how to operationalize this. Well, again, there's quite some literature on that, which I find very interesting, especially Thelen has done a lot of work on that, in which there are different types of institutional change. I think I've seen one or two presentations that actually take that on board, like institutional layering, institutional drift, institutional conversion. It's not really about replacing the regime. It's not about substituting the existing institutions, but it is about creating new institutions on top of what is already there, or to adapt a bit institutions, but not challenging the existing regime. This is interesting because I think it would really come close to the notion of institutional complementarities, in which you're not gonna define a regime that is very complementary inside, but you're gonna connect the old and possibly a new regime by looking at what they have to, what complements are there between the two, and to what extent the one can trigger the other. Again, this literature is very much on case studies. Right? So you take an example, you take a particular regime, then it provides really detailed insight how this regime actually works and how change might still be implemented. But can we really say something in general about the fact when we apply that, which regions are more successful in making institutional change and why that is? It is one thing in saying, yeah, that institutional change is needed. Another thing is saying, yeah, which regions would we expect to make in a more successful way the required institutional changes? To me, that remains still rather a black box. Also, and this is very much related to that, is that therefore there's little understanding of how institutional structures provide opportunities to make certain institutional change. So again, that is what we are after. Now, so this has been kind of, in a nutshell, three big literatures: Varieties of Capitalism, Policy Mix, and Socio-Technical Transitions, that have a particular look at how institutional complementarities might actually work. But as I said, I took also a kind of critical note on that, and I think we have to go a bit beyond that. Now let's first see to what extent we can, because you can reinvent the wheel, but you can also try to see to what extent there are also kind of first steps being made in that literature that can really provide some inputs to think about an alternative. First, I found one, and that is really a topic that I care about a lot myself, and I've done quite a lot of papers on that, and also here in this conference, by the way, is how regions diversify, right? So, and that depends very, so I've seen many papers that are actually saying, okay, to what extent particular capabilities might enhance the probability that you will enter a new field, right? So it might be a new export product, might be a new technology, it might be a new sector, etc. And then, of course, the proposition is that those local capabilities conditions which new activities will be feasible to develop in the region. Well, you want to go into AI, but if you don't have the capabilities to go AI, you will fail to do so. Well, if you have related activities in AI, you might have a higher chance to become successful in AI. So again, local capabilities provide opportunities, but they set also limits to what you can achieve in this diversification process. And many papers were on that in this conference. But the way it has been measured is all about using pattern data. So we are talking about technological capabilities. I've seen a few on scientific capabilities. And also I saw export products. But that's it. But nothing about institutions. Right? So could we not develop something like to what extent institutional relatedness might enable this regional diversification process? Because that might provide an alternative explanation beyond knowledge or skill relatedness or technological relatedness, that some regions are more capable of moving into some activities and not in others. And that would happen if new activities require institutions that are similar to those that support local industries. Right? So then the likelihood that you will develop an industry, a new industry that requires the similar institutions that the ones that already the region is specialized in, then the probability that that activity will be developed in that region might be actually high. So it's really about trying to see to what extent institutional relatedness might be an important driver for regional diversification. Now, there are a few studies indeed that have taken that perspective. And this has been referred to as the transposition of institutions between industries. So some institutions can also be still relevant and very useful in other industries. So you're looking which type of industries share similar institutional requirements and which one not. There's a nice paper by our Portuguese colleague Carvalho and Vale on the rise of biotech in the Portuguese region in the northern part of Portugal. I'm not aware of that paper, but they actually make this point that they are saying is, hey, I think it was the Norte region that was quite successful in moving into biotech because they could use all kinds of institutions that were already there from the beginning that biotech could actually exploit in order to become successful. Another paper, which I found a very interesting one, was published in the Journal of Economic Geography in 2020 by some Swedish colleagues. And they actually showed that Bordeaux was once specialized in slave trade and was moving into wine trade and actually made use of the institutions that made them dominant in slave trade, which they could readily use in order to become specialized in wine trade. And they describe in detail how that actually worked and how those institutions in slave trade were very relevant and useful to develop a fully fledged wine trade in Bordeaux, which happened in the probably in the 19th century. Another paper, which are very much on sustainable transition, is the rise of renewable energy cooperative in German districts. And there, what they observed is, if there are already institutions in place in terms of social capital and tradition in collaboration, if that was available in a German district, they would be more inclined to become successful in renewable energy cooperative, because those cooperative really is a kind of organization that is actually doing well in that type of institutional environment. So here again, you can move into something new in terms of, in this case, renewable energy cooperatives that can actually exploit existing institutions that are very much connected to other specializations. Now, again, this is very much work in progress, very much focused on case studies. There are no quantitative comparative studies as far as I know. And of course, these are cases. But the ambition, at least my ambition, is to connect it to all types of institutions. We'll come back to that. And they tend to take a static approach, right? So the institutions are there and you can exploit them, but what about institutional change? Should that not also be part of the analysis? Second potential application that can actually be observed already is the Nelson literature, right? Saying that, okay, see, when you want to pursue structural change, it means you have to create, abolish, and transform institutions, right? So this is all what we know. Because institutions need to be constructed, because it is unlikely that existing institutions can actually play that role. And existing institutions might even contest their emergence, right? So they might go against that, and they will block these new developments because vested interests might be too powerful to make that happen. And therefore, this literature actually put a lot of emphasis on the critical role of institution entrepreneurs that engage in collective action to mobilize resources, build legitimacy, and create institutions to support new path development. And there's really some good work on that. But the question which still remains open, is this more likely to happen in some institutional settings than in others? Can we characterize some countries or regions that can actually, in which we can observe these institutional entrepreneurs can be actually more successful because they can build on existing institutions that are already there? It's good literature, I think, but again, it's very descriptive, it's very case specific. And again, as I already said, there's some work to be done. Other potential application is going back to the policy mix literature and to see to what extent we can increase our understanding of how existing policy mixes and past policy history enables or constrain policy options. I have seen very few studies in regional studies in that respect. So this is kind of open field that needs to be discovered and needs to be applied. I myself, I'm very much involved in smart specialization policy in the European Union. There's no study whatsoever on smart specialization policy that take a policy mix perspective in that respect. It all raises all kinds of interesting questions. So are there limits to institutional learning, right? So I do think that institutional learning is very limited across territories but they can be more successful when countries or regions share similar institutional capabilities. Then, but that is nice to say, but can we actually observe that in practice? So policies do not take place in vacuum, but unfold in institutional context. So we also have to think about to what extent the policy options that are available in regions might be connected to a particular institutional context. So not only to other policies that are already being implemented in a region, but also to the institutional context. And can we not observe that some policy changes are impossible to implement given the institutions that are available there? Now, again, this is all very theoretical, but you can study that empirical, and I will come back to that in a minute. So how to determine those complementarities between institutions and policy and between policy domains? This is something which, of course, is a huge challenge. So now looking at those literatures and having reviewed them, what I think can be observed is that there are a lot of gaps in this particular literature that I try to summarize in a kind of nutshell. First of all, which institutions and which policies are complementary to each other? I think it's a fundamental question that we have to address. Which institutional combinations and policy makers territory make in practice? I am super curious about that. What we can observe and do the combinations that countries or regions tend to make in general, and if those combinations happen a lot, would they not reveal a certain logic that we have to understand? So it's not predefined, but we just look at what we observe in reality, what we observe in practice. That might provide important insights. Third, how coherent is a set of institutions and policymakers that territories make in practice? I don't think we have a lot of understanding of that. Which other territories they share similar institutions and policy? Which groups of territories can be identified? Can we observe on a global scale which countries have more in common than others? The fifth question to me is the most important one, is can we identify an opportunity set of each territory in terms of the institutional and policy chances that can be actually implemented? Because if that would be the case, again, no one size fits all, but we really have to tailor-made and see to what extent policy changes can only become effective when they match, when they fit existing policies and existing institutions. Which activities have similar institutional requirements? I'm talking about economic activities, right? So in the whole Soskai's book was a very interesting observation that they made, is that, for example, in liberal market economies, you have much more science-based industries, right? Because it's more focused on radical change because the set of institutions enable them to do so. Well, in coordinated market economy is more engineering-based industries in which those countries are being specialized, because those activities require a long-term commitment from the capital market, from the labor market, in order to become successful. To what extent, and I already talked about that, is, can institutional relatedness provide an alternative explanation for why some regions are more capable of diversifying than other regions? And then last but not least, a very important question is, does that also have any effect on all kinds of outcome indicators like economic performance or sustainable transition? Now, these questions require a methodology and a systematic methodology, because if I want to go beyond descriptive case studies, I have to think about a methodology that can actually measure those institutional complementarities on a global scale. And then the ambition is, and the ambition is super high, is to identify complementarities between institutions, between policies, and between policies and institutions. So on that level. Now we have, and again, it refers to many papers that have been presented in this conference. Let's go back to the product space concept that was introduced by Hidalgo and others in this 2007 science paper. Because as we all know, that was based on co-occurrence of export products and export portfolios of countries. I just copied that this product space from their article. And in this network, each node stands for an export product. If there's a link between them or they're closely positioned in this network, it means they share similar capabilities. If they're far from each other, they are not related. Now, the ambition here is, why not take this co-occurrence technique to define complementarities between institutions? Then each node in this network will not become an export product, but will become an institution. It can be property rights, it can be social capital, it can be a law, it can be a regulation. Let's put that all into what will then become an institutional space. And then we do co-occurrence analysis and I have now a data set that can distinguish between about 450 institutional variables. I can just, I can just do a very data-driven approach. I just put those 450 institutional variables in this co-occurrence matrix. And then I will get something like that. I can actually see which combinations countries actually make in terms of the set of institutions that they have. And some combinations are more common than other combinations of institutions, and that will be revealed through this, what I then would refer to an institutional space. So some institutions might be very much related to each other, while other institutions have nothing in common because that combinations has never been made in any country worldwide. And maybe that is not a coincidence. There might be some logic here why we don't find it. You can also do that you can also build a policy space. So you can also look at all kinds of policy variables. And I have already collected many. On all kinds of policy domains. It can be on sustainable policy, emancipation policy, social policy, economic policy, etc. Again, super data driven. And then we can maybe observe which policies are often being combined at the country level and which policies are never being combined in any country. Maybe it will reveal some logic when we would look that in more detail. Well, this is so. What you're going to do is you build an institutional profile of each country or each region. Of course, institutional variables are much more available at the national scale than at the subnational scale. So better start at the national scale and try to experiment here, and then do this co-occurrence analysis and build build this policy profiles of countries, institutional profiles of countries, and to see to what extent the countries or regions make similar combinations. Then we can derive this network measure of institutional and policy relatedness, in which each node stands for an institution policy and each link between two node signals institutional policy readiness. And then we can, and then I don't know how much time I still have left, but I can stop here. I would be really like to get some feedback because I'm sometimes struggling with this. If we take this information, we derive this information from the institutional space and the policy space, we can then actually see to what extent countries have actually opportunities to implement institutional change and policy change, because it is very much connected to the set of institutions that they already have. Right? This is basically the same as this diversification literature that we all talked about here, but you just apply it to policy and institutions. You can, as I said, as an alternative, explain regional diversification through what institutions are in common and whether new industries require institutions that are similar to the ones countries already have. That they will have a much higher likelihood to be successful in those. And which combinations of institutions and policy, which we observe in reality, if we regress that on economic growth or social inequality or environmental sustainability, can we observe something interesting? Now, as I said, this puts really high demands on the type of variables that are needed. As I said, there are quite, I mean, I'm now looking already for months about data sets that are available internationally. There's a lot available. I was really surprised because we tend to go always for the same type of institutional variables. But if you really go and explore a bit the internet and see what is available, I find it quite amazing. I was quite surprised. But of course, in the end, what matters is, can we make any sense out of this type of exercise when we get outcomes, and how can we interpret those outcomes, right? Or is it just garbage in, garbage out when you just take a purely data-driven approach? So that is, of course, the main challenge that needs to be taken up. As I said, there are many data sets on formal and informal institutions. Actually, what I observed is that most of those institutional indicators are pretty good because they are based on perceptions of citizens and companies and experts in large-scale surveys. So it's very well covered in that respect. So you have the rule of law index. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Consists of many institutional variables. Quality of government index, right? That is available at the subnational scale. You also have there about 80 variables. So you can pick those. You can just include them all, or you can say, okay, I'm just interested in, let's say, in sustainable transition. So I only select those institutional variables which might affect the environmental transition, and then of course you select only those institutional variables that might be relevant in that respect. Okay, I think I'll leave it to that. So again, I have nothing to present empirically, but I'm working hard on it. Well, looking forward to your comments. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ron. I think this lecture, it's really, we think a lot. There's a lot of questions. I think it's good for the students thinking new.
By the way, what I forgot to tell is this was an assignment by the European Commission. Can you believe it? So there was, and this was also in DG Economic and Finance. So DG ECFIN, which is mainstream economists basically, and they were interested in the idea, and I got paid and did that and did this for them. So I mean, there's also kind of interesting context in which this was being developed.
Yeah. So would you like? I will open for the questions, suggestions. I think suggestions not so, but Janaína. can start, please. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should I now? Go ahead.
Oh no, so no, please go ahead. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Would you like to answer?
Yeah, I can. Otherwise, my memory is not that good. Getting old.
I can't believe this.
Institutions versus organizations. That is a classic, right? So I don't look at organizations here, right? So what I find often confusing in the literature that people refer to organizations as if there were institutions. Now, okay, there's a lot to say on this, because organizations can also, like Nelson and Winter, they can also have a certain kind of routines, right? So then you might even come a bit closer to the notion of institutions, but it depends very much on the definition of institutions that you have. But what I do here is more look at formal and informal institutions besides organizations, right? So then yeah, about the interplay between formal and informal institutions. Yes, Azamoglu. I mean, of course, there are studies that are actually well, the institutions are still analyzed in isolation, but of course, then you can take interaction terms, right? So you can say that, okay, you find a positive effect of intellectual property rights, but when you interact that with social capital, the effect will become bigger or not, right? So you can say that is also a way of looking at complementarities, right? So but of course you can only. I saw somebody doing an interaction between three variables in this conference. But it's always very hard to interpret, right? So yeah, okay, that makes it easier. Yes, yeah, exactly. But of course, here I want to include many institutional variables, right? So that the interaction terms won't work there anymore. So that's why I think you have to move on and look for a different methodology. Yeah, okay. So you say, yeah, the product space was in a way simple because it is quite clear what is an export product, right? So you refer to the example of an apple. Yes, I guess apples are, well, they're probably not the same in every country, and they would taste very differently. But I can see your point. But think about cars, and it becomes already much more complicated, right? So I mean, the cars that are produced in some countries might be very different than in other countries, and also the way they are produced. So it's not that easy also in the product space in that respect. But here you work with international data sets, and they use a common methodology. Now, I cannot exclude that citizens will experience institutions in Brazil differently, the same institutions in Brazil differently than in the US. I mean, this is very thorough research on this. So I don't think you can ever exclude that completely. But the data sets, the way the data are collected, are quite convincing, I must say. So I wouldn't be too worried about that. Yeah, then the role of informal institutions in Brazil. Yeah, but there are also formal institutions in Brazil, right? So what I'm interested in is the interaction between the two, right? So is it the case that the two might reinforce each other, or if formal institutions do not actually work? Yeah, is therefore indeed can Brazil make the next step because of that, right? So this is exactly what we are after, and try to see in to what extent those institutions should actually be combined in order to move Brazil forward. But it is a reality that formal and informal institutions exist. So you better account for them and see to what extent we can observe irregularities in the type of combinations that countries actually make, and whether that might have an impact on their outcome. Right? So.
Fernando?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, of course, in those in those data sets that I talk about, there's a lot about democracy, right? So you have data sets on individual freedom. I mean, that is really well captured in those large international data sets by all kinds of international organizations. So yes, you could actually make the point to what extent those yeah, of course, it's a big topic nowadays, right? So not only left behind places, but also the undermining of all kinds of democratic institutions. Look at what happens in the US right now, right? So and it's interesting to see also in that context what happens in the US right now, because if I'm well informed, and I think I am, is that Trump is debunking all the major institutions in the US, right? Just because of self-interest, right? So those from the Supreme Court, The Republican Party, that is nowhere anymore, right? So he has complete freedom to act. Well, in his first term, the Republican Party was still the constraining factor, and he could not do really stupid things. But now he can, because he's undermining democratic values, undermining the check and balances in the American system. He is replacing civil servants in the public sector, and well, first of all, get rid of most of them, or you replace them with your own people, right? That is also what he's doing. So this is also interesting, right? So we had a whole system that is now bombarding at all levels, and then the question is exactly comes to what I was presenting. Will Trump actually succeed in doing that? Because it is not easy to change the system, right? So you still hope that check and balances there. People go to court, right? So I mean, how many court cases are actually happening right now? And we still have to hear what will be the outcome of all those court cases. But I expect that many things that Trump wants to implement is impossible, it's illegal, or whatever, right? Or it goes to all kinds of it goes maybe even against the Constitution, things like that. So here you see, it's exactly, then you look from a systemic perspective, and then you can actually see what is possible and what is not possible. This is what Trump is doing, is trying to implement institutional change and see how far he can go. Now, I drifted away a bit from left behind places, but yes, the democratic values. I don't think Andres Rodriguez Pose is not doing diversification, but it would be interesting to see to what extent the undermining of demographic values might have an impact. For example, I might suggest it might work through a ban of migration, right? So I mean, and that of course will be bad in many ways for their economy, but also for innovation. There are now quite a lot of studies that actually show that migrants are crucial for innovation. Well, if you block that, and also in the context of huge labor shortages that we have in many countries, it's of course that is a recipe for economic disaster. Did I answer a bit your question, or? Sorry that I talked too much about Trump. It's unavoidable.
More questions? No. So, thank you, Ron. I think there is a lot to think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's.
I think it is really inspiring. A new avenue, new researches, and this question is good to think.
That's the point that I struggle right now with, is to come up with a good empirical case, right? So that can make the point. And I'm thinking about sustainable transition policy, because there are so much policy domains involved in that. So, yes, of course, in the end, it should work empirically.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
No.
I didn't get it. Where do you select? From our residence. Yeah, okay. Yeah.